Tonight on America's Hope, women in sports, the crisis they face in terms of their mental health, the price she pays. That's our focus tonight on America's Hope, which starts right now. And joining me now on America's Hope is Katie Steele. She is an athlete. She grew up in her home state of Oregon with a love for running. In fact, she went on to compete in the state championship and won. She then moved on to the University of Oregon, beginning there. But that's when things begin to take a turn for the worse when it comes to women in sports. Because at that particular time, Katie discovered that female athletes, well, they weren't always treated fairly. In fact, they were mistreated and exploited. She's going to talk to us about that. And making matters worse, Katie then came under the care of Alberto Salazar and Dr. Jeffrey Brown, two of the most notorious and deplorable sports victims that we know of in modern history, both of whom were later banned from the sport for doping, with Salazar further banned for life because of sexual misconduct. Katie's experience was devastating to her physical and mental health. And after more than a decade of treatment and therapy, she found her calling to help other young athletes with mental health. And she joins us now as a licensed marriage and family therapist, and recently co-founded a nonprofit called the Athletes Mental Health Foundation, a consortium of mental health clinics, clinicians, I should say, athletes, coaches, and parents, whose main goals are to normalize mental health by promoting education and engagement to enable everyone involved in athletics to be able to talk about the full spectrum of mental health. And Katie, you're also the author of a new book which debuts later this month. Talk to me about the book and the name of it and why it matters to so many female athletes, but people beyond the sport.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us and drawing awareness. The book comes out June 18th. It's called The Price She Pays. And it came together, Tiffany and I had conversation after conversation of athletes that we were seeing clinically or those who were stepping away from sport and the long-term implications of their experience of being an athlete. And we started kind of just noticing and questioning how come the number is really high that people are leaving with more healing to do than the empowerment that we know sport can leave on a human being. And that's when we really started digging into the mass amounts of stories and experiences that we know could be prevented with mental health integration into sports systems.
Yeah, and you know, Katie, the book, The Price She Pays, also confronts the hidden mental health crisis in women's sports. And I like the way you explained it in the title of the book, from the schoolyard to the stadium. What about at home, what these young female athletes have to contend with at home? Because, you know, let's face it, a lot of dads, a lot of moms are so proud of their athlete, regardless of being female or male, but then they encounter what she's up against when she's out there competing and has to deal with so many scenarios that could lead to mistreatment and exploitation.
Absolutely. I mean, if only there was one area that needed kind of this makeover, right? It is a systemic issue. There are gaps kind of across the board with athletic systems and at home. And if we can all work together to implement some changes, it really can change the landscape of how kids leading into whenever they choose to step away from sport are able to gain what we hope people gain from sport, because there is so much beauty and the character that's built through sport. We know it is an amazing place, and we need to make sure that it's a healthy place and that it's an ethical place. And some of the most profound interviews when writing The Price She Pays were with 7-year-olds, right? And that's really where we learned, wow, this starts so early. The conditioning of young girls thinking their place on the playground is the swings and the play structure, not the fields and the sport courts.
For you, Katie, what was it like? Because you had this love for running, and as I stated earlier, you made it to the championship while you were in high school, and you won the state championship. Where did things go awry for you in college when you began to notice how you had been treated as a female athlete?
Yeah, I feel really fortunate that finding sport was a place of intrinsic motivation and love. I loved it. I loved running. And so the passion was fueled by that love. And when I got to college was the first time that I really learned that I was running for approval versus for passion. And I ended up in systems that weren't healthy, that there was abuse and there was, Alberto, the mistreatment of prescribing medication that I didn't need. And I didn't learn a lot about my story until 10 years later, right? So I didn't even know the magnitude of it until I stepped away. I knew it didn't feel great. I knew it was confusing, but it took 10 years to really learn the magnitude of what I had experienced. And so I think that's a really big piece of it, is transparency and honesty within the sports system is critical, so that people know what they're working with. Because, and we heard this from athlete after athlete, of athletes oftentimes think they're the problem. And not that there aren't expectations of athletes, but there also is a systemic accountability that we need to make sure is embedded into the programs, rather than athletes just absorbing all of the responsibility and then endorsing the shame, thinking that they're the ones that are contributing to all of the shortcomings. And I know I did that. And my hope is that for athletes, not that they don't work hard, not that they don't show up and work as hard as they can, because the shared goal is all there, right? We aren't trying to say winning isn't a part of the equation, but it can't be at the expense of the human being.
Yeah, the impact. Let's talk about more of the impact, because you went through it and you overcame it. How did you deal with it? And were there people there in your network of support to say, Katie, we see you going through this, we can help you? Did you have people helping you?
So my story is interesting in the sense of I didn't know what had happened until 10 years later. And I was sitting in a fertility doctor's office and he said to me, "Do you know you were treated for a thyroid condition that you never had?" And I mean, this will date me, but it was paper chart days, right? So like he had this massive chart and he was going through it. And fortunately I had gotten second opinions, and these doctors took really comprehensive notes. So 10 years after I had been prescribed the medication, sitting in this doctor's office and saying, no, I had no idea. I didn't know that had happened, right? So I had a whole narrative that was inaccurate. I thought Alberto and Dr. Brown were helping me and that they believed in me and they provided me with this treatment because they saw potential and that they cared. And 10 years later, I learned that was so far from the truth. And so re-piecing it together then through the medical records and consulting with other people who maybe would have any information, and there's still gaps. And I grapple with it some, and I'll reach these periods where I feel like I've kind of got a handle on it, and other periods of time where it still kind of guts me. But I believe I know the power of healing. I know the possibility of change. And I know as humans, we're capable of adapting and responding in a beautiful way when we put some elbow grease behind it. And I wish I wouldn't have had to do it, but I've lived it and know that it's possible. However, I also know we can prevent people having to use those resources for these types of situations.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far of America's Hope. If you'd like to see it in its entirety, just click on the link below. Thanks for watching.